Today I'm going to be talking about computational thinking and the engineering design process. My name is Holly Graffam. I'm an MLTI ambassador, and here is my contact information, my email, my Twitter feed, and the link to the MLTI PD playlist. So if you like this video and you want to see others like it, or from my fellow ambassadors, you can go ahead and click on this link. There will be a PDF of this slide deck in the description of this video, so you'll be able to click on any of the links that are presented throughout the slide deck. What is computational thinking? Computational thinking is a thinking process that students can use to define, analyze, and explore open-ended problems to generate solutions. Computational thinking is often associated with math or computers, but it is applicable across curriculum. So we have been talking about problem solving, and now I'm going to try to link some thinking processes behind the problem solving. While they do involve thinking, obviously, but there are also some physical tasks that you associate, particularly with the engineering design process. And the computational thinking is really the thinking behind those processes. So I think we would do well here to go back and review the importance of problem solving skills. If you haven't been following this whole series, I will just do a quick little review about why it's important to have problem solving skills in the classroom. Providing problem solving opportunities in the classroom builds skills in critical thinking, analysis, creativity, and resiliency. And students need explicit instruction on how to transfer those skills in order to be able to solve more complex problems independently. And if that wasn't enough, if you look at the top 10 skills that employers were looking for in 2020, right there, the top three: complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity. So as our job as educators is to try to help our students become college and career ready, we need to make sure that we are providing them with the skills that they're going to be asked to access. And so students need some explicit instruction in that. So why should students be computational thinkers? We know that they should be problem solvers, but why should they be computational thinkers? That's because using aspects of computational thinking, we are teaching our students how to be better problem solvers. So not only are we providing them opportunities to practice these problem solving skills, we're going to give them some thinking processes that they're going to be able to apply to the problem solving to make that more effective and efficient. And here is what the research says about teaching problem solving skills in the classroom. And I'm talking mostly about Marzano and Hattie here. I think that these are probably the two biggest names in educational research, and really are kind of the gold standards of when we're looking at effect size on student outcomes. And talking about effect size, so here you see I've got two different ones, 0.54 and 0.61. Really what we're talking about is 0.40 is what they refer to as the hinge point, right? So anything below 0.40, 0 to 0.40, anything in the positive is not going to hurt students, but it's not really impacting their outcomes in the way that we would like it to. Obviously, anything that is negative would negatively impact them. But anything that, when we start getting to to things that we do in the classroom, influences is what Hattie referred to them as. Once we get to that effect size of 0.40 and above, then we are starting to see significant influences on student outcomes. And so Marzano found that problem solving had a 0.54 impact on student understanding, and he believes that problems should require students to apply previously learned knowledge and skills. And Hattie agrees with this. When you are using problem solving in this way, Hattie found the similar size effect of 0.61. And Hattie, also emphasizes the importance of teaching students how to solve problems. Students use what they have learned to solve real world problems and dilemmas. So there's a lot of research around the inclusion of problem solving and, by extension, computational thinking in your classrooms. So there are four key elements of computational thinking: decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, and algorithm. And I think at first glance, for you elementary school teachers that teach multiple content areas, or those of you that maybe teach math at the higher grades, are thinking, wow, this is really math focused because these are common math themes. And what I'm going to really talk about today is that's, yes, they are embedded in math, in science, but honestly, they're really a cross curricular way of problem solving. So, decomposition is taking a complex problem and breaking it down into smaller, manageable parts. We have students do this all the time. Again, you might think about breaking down a math word problem, but we also do this all the time in other classes, right? We're constantly having students, what we refer to as chunking. Uh, that is really taking a big problem or a big task and breaking that down into smaller, more manageable parts. Pattern recognition, recognizing if there is a pattern and determining the sequence, finding similarities within the problem and among other problems. So this is about, oh, I see that there is a pattern here. Can I take that knowledge that I have about that pattern and can I apply that to see if there is a similar pattern in another problem? And so again, very often in math, but we look for patterns really across curricular, right? When we are looking at phonics in ELA, we are looking for patterns. And I'll give you a bunch of more examples of each one of these elements and in each of the four core content areas. Abstraction, I think in and of itself, when we talk about abstract concepts or abstraction, this is often the hardest one for students to really grapple with, but it's focusing on only the important details of the problem and then ignoring other lesser important details. So, when we look at this, this is really about how can I extract information. Think about a word problem and how we're often tell students to solve word problems that they should circle just the most important things, right? And kind of eliminate all the stuff that you don't really need to know to solve the problem. That is abstracting. Algorithms, which is develop a step-by-step guide to solve problems or a set of rules to solve that allows it to be replicated. This is definitely, we see algorithms all across life, right? This is probably the most common of any of the computational thinking because it affects not just classroom, it could be your morning routine, that could be an algorithm. How to tie your shoe, that could be an algorithm. Following a recipe is an algorithm. So algorithms are found really across, not only across content, but really across life. And so that is probably the most uh, easiest component to really focus on with students. And so, how does computational thinking and the engineering design process, like where's that intersection? Um, I've given you several different types of graphics around engineering design. And when I say engineering design by extension, I kind of also mean the design thinking models, or just the basic problem solving model that we've looked at. Well, while we know that each of them is usually applied in a unique situation, they're very similar, and often, um, sometimes when I'm talking about them, they're kind of interchangeable. Recognize that they're not completely interchangeable, but they're similar enough that um, we can use them in this instance. When I'm talking engineering design, this is applicable to the other two as well. So, um, again, this is a little bit different than the engineering design processes I've shown before, but the language is just a little different. The the components are really the same. So, defining the problem. What is the question that you're trying to solve? Brainstorming solutions, des- designing, determining which solution is the best, and um, coming up with a design, establishing criteria, constraints. And then you got to build, test, and improve. And that's that iteration process that we think about when we think about engineering design or design thinking. And then communicate the results. And you can see in this graphic, I've highlighted exactly where each of the computational thinking components are embedded in this engineering design process. So they're really not separate. You can't really have engineering design without using computational thinking. Um, so when I was talking about earlier, this is really the thinking process behind the design processes that we've been talking about. They're the computational thinking is clearly embedded in everything you do. And I just wanted to recognize the the specific standards for next gen science standards around engineering practices, because if you are trying to connect these to standards in your classroom, the engineering design process is clearly embedded in next gen science standards, and computational thinking is embedded even deeper into the engineering design process. I'm going to go through a couple of graphics here where I'm going to start making some content connections to computational thinking. Um, and by extension, I know that I really said that this was about the engineering design process, but remember, we've talked about you're able to use engineering design or design thinking is not content specific. While the specific standards are embedded in science around the engineering design process, there you can use that processes across contents, and I think that we've already kind of clearly flushed that out before here. So I just want to make some connections of computational thinking in the different content areas. And this one is really talking about mathematical and computational thinking and the intersection with engineering, with science and engineering with that. I'm not going to read through all of this, but you should be able to clearly connect, go back and look at the slide deck and really dig into this if you would like to. And so the next couple slides, I'm going to talk about the connection of computational thinking and other content areas. Computational thinking isn't about doing something extra in your classroom. You're probably already doing it in your classroom, and I'm gonna show you how that is probably happening. It's just being aware and maybe being a little bit more explicit about it and bringing out those problem solving skills and talking about um, the problem solving process in how you are using the computational thinking skills to go through those processes. So it's really just about making this thinking more visible with your students. And that could be, through think alouds, or you could have visuals. It could be that explicit, but we really want to make sure that we are teaching these students problem solving skills, having them recognize that they are problem solving skills. So if they come to a problem in the real world, they are able to draw on those skills to help them solve it. So I'm not going to go deeply into math because I think that the connections with math are just obvious. But if you want to have some more examples of how you're using computational thinking in math, here are some examples. And similarly with science, beyond just the engineering design process, there are other ways that you are probably using computational thinking in your science classrooms. Now, you might not think of computational thinking and problem solving in ELA, but it's clearly embedded in the classroom. This just talk about writing an essay, right? When students are writing an essay, what is it that you teach them to do? You chunk it up. Let's write the introduction. Let's write the conclusion. Here's the different paragraphs. So we kind of chunk it up for them. Pattern recognition. If you're doing any phonics, there's a specific pattern recognition that you're asking students to use to help them sound out new words, right? Algorithms. You could go back to the essay, and if you're thinking of something that is, typically taught, the 5-paragraph essay, right? That's a formula. That's an algorithm that you have students use in their writing. It could also be in poetry. And if you want to even think really more concrete with the poetry, let's talk about haiku. That is a very specific algorithm that you follow in order to create a haiku. And is the abstraction piece. We could talk about a book report or some sort of conversation around books if you're doing lit circles or anything around analyzing literature. What are you don't want them to regurgitate a play-by-play of of what's happening. What you want them to do is be able to pull out the most relevant information and be able to analyze that. And so they're really abstracting the details from the book to make an analysis of the literature. In the social sciences, there are also decomposition. Sometimes they're real specific, like the 3 branches of government. We break up all of the different responsibilities of the government into the 3 different branches. Our systems of checks and balances. It could be something that's a little bit more, a little bit less concrete than that, like comparing and contrasting. empires and what are the patterns that we see. And it also could be looking at economic patterns. Like we know that that often economies are cyclical, right? Like we have certain patterns that we go through. So that is something different. In again, specifically in the legislative system, when we're talking about passing bills and laws, there's a very specific procedure that you would go through in order to be able to do that. It could be like, what is the procedure on how to vote? There's lots of places that we can find algorithms in our social sciences. And abstraction, um, the probably the most common look at abstraction would be maps. If you think about different maps have different purposes, right? And so you need different details depending on what your purpose is for that map. If I want to know the physical features of Maine, I don't need a map that has all the roads and highways, right? I'm really looking for elevations. Contrastly, maybe I'm planning a trip between Portland to Caribou. I don't need to know the elevations of all the different mountains and hills between there. I need a map that has the highway of how I'm going to get from Portland to Caribou. And I don't need a map that is so detailed that I don't need to know all the streets of every city on my way. I just need the larger picture. So maps are often about abstracting all that information. You could layer all that information. It's all there in one big map. But I'm looking for maps for different purposes. And I want to touch a little bit about computational and computer science, computational thinking and computer science, because my next series that I'll be doing in a couple of weeks will be around computer science across the curriculum. But computational thinking is really is the foundation of computer science. Computational thinking doesn't require a computer per se, but the thinking process ultimately builds the foundational skills for using computing as a tool to assist with problem solving. So, if you really want to think about problem solving and that connection to computer science is how can we take computing or computers to solve problems. So that's the intersection. You're still problem solving. And when we talk a little bit more about computer science, you are using all of those elements of computational thinking as you're trying to solve the problems, but it's just in the context of computer science. So just think of computer science as really another content area that computational thinking is embedded. But more than other areas, it's really the foundational skills. You have to be able to have those skills if you're going to really be able to use computers to solve problems. And that's why it's important to teach computational thinking in across different content areas to help students develop these skills and start seeing the broader use of problem solving skills, right? That it isn't just about solving a math problem, that you use these thinking processes across the disciplines as well as in your own everyday life. And that is really what we want to get to with the problem solving. I just happened to think, and I want to bring this back around because I really said that this was going to be about the engineering design process. Problems using something like the engineering design process or the design thinking process is really an engaging way for students to be able to solve problems. It's a very kind of specific, it's an algorithm, if you will, right? It's a very specific um, process of solving problems, but it's engaging, and students are really building these skills that we know that they're going to need um, as they exit our K-12 learning environments. So I want to thank everybody for taking some time and listen to me talk about computational thinking. If you'd like to get point 0.5 contact hours, you can click on the link on this slide in the slide deck. Again, there will be a PDF link in the description of the video to this slide deck. Thank you and have a great day.